is a video to Mr. Running Wolf. Now, I apologize that I'm not showing my face in this video. To be quite honest, I'm still pretty sick, and I'm not going to spend that much time on this guy because he's obviously a few fries short of a Happy Meal. But I'm still going to address his arguments because, unfortunately, they're more common than we'd like to admit. He uses a lot of logical fallacies in his arguments. I'm going to go through those fallacies and try to explain to him about why his reasoning is erroneous. Hopefully, if I speak slow enough and use small words, he'll understand me. Now, if you've taken a high school or college level debate class or logic class, you've probably run into the term deductive reasoning. Basically, deductive reasoning's basic philosophy is that the conclusion is inferred by the premise given, and that there can be no other conclusion other than that suggested by the premise. I'll give you an example. Here's an example of deductive reasoning. A triangle is a closed polygon with 3 sides. That's premise 1. 2, I drew a closed polygon with 3 sides. Premise 2. Your conclusion, then, obviously is inferred, which is, therefore, I drew a triangle. Now, obviously, the example that I gave is mathematics. And in mathematics or geometry, we have a lot of absolutes, and therefore, it's a good example of deductive reasoning. But in areas where there's not a lot of absolutes, the breakdown in reasoning happens when things are taken as absolutes when they shouldn't be. Now, here is a cleaned up version of one of Mr. Running Wolfe's arguments based on deductive reasoning. To embrace a religion or practice is to tolerate it. The U.S. tolerates pagan practice on military bases. Therefore, the U.S. is embracing paganism. Now, obviously, I cleaned up his argument because he rambles a little bit more, and I had to analyze what he was saying to draw his argument from that. So you're not going to find those exact statements within his video, although he does specifically state that the U.S. is embracing paganism. And the main premise of his video is that they are now allowing pagan practices at Air Force academies. So that's why I drew this argument out of what he was saying and what he was implying. I had to shorten it, obviously, but this is what he's saying. You can draw that from the video, obviously. Now, I must point out why this is a logical fallacy, and that is that if you've got a premise in your deductive reasoning which is incorrect, then the entire deductive argument falls apart. In Mr. Running Wolfe's statement about U.S. government, obviously the deductive reasoning that falls apart is that to embrace a religion or practice is to tolerate it. If you look up embracing, it doesn't just simply mean tolerate. And so to act like tolerance of a specific religion is to embrace it is a false premise, and therefore deductive reasoning falls apart. Now, the way to show that this premise is false is to insert another applicable term into where another term was located. For example, first premise, to embrace something is to tolerate it. That was his first premise in the first one. The second premise would be the U.S. government tolerates Christian practices at military bases. Therefore, the U.S. embraces Christianity. Now, he would obviously disagree with this statement because he thinks that the U.S. government is embracing paganism and therefore cannot embrace Christianity. Another false premise, by the way. But the idea is that if you're going to state that about one religion, you could state that about any religion, that therefore it tolerates at military bases. So it breaks down in several different ways. Now, obviously, the basis of the fact the first premise is wrong is that embracing something does not mean tolerating something. So here's the two definitions. The definition of embrace is quite simple, and it basically means to adopt. There's several different definitions that talk about physical embracing, but the act of adopting a concept or to accept as one's own, is one thing that I found in several different dictionary definitions. To tolerate is simply to put up with or to allow its existence. Therefore, tolerating something and allowing and embracing something are two different things. Now, Mr. Running Wolf also claims that neo-pagans want to, quote-unquote, kill Christians and take away their rights. Although he does not state the basis for this claim, I can only assume that the reason he believes this is something based on deductive reasoning, false deductive reasoning at that. Something along the lines of he may have run into a couple neo-pagans who were anti-Christian and therefore deduced incorrectly that all neo-pagans hate Christians, want them killed, and want to take away their rights. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. I stand as testimony against that claim because I believe that all religions, regardless of how ridiculous they are, should deserve equal rights within government settings, including Air Force academies. I don't seek to take away the rights of Christians, just to simply stop them from taking away our rights. Now, it seems to me that he doesn't believe that we're capable of allowing both neo-pagans and Christians to receive equal rights at the same time. I don't understand what he bases this belief on, but he does suggest in his video that if neo-pagans are allowed to practice, that they will eventually do harm to Christians. And I'm not sure exactly what he bases that on. Once again, he doesn't back up his conclusion. He made another video to me, so I'm going to be doing another video response to that one as well. Once again, I apologize for not doing these space videos. I'm really not feeling very good, so I'm not going to bother to get dressed and go through all the hubbub of getting ready for that. But anyway, he says at the end of his video that basically allowing paganism to be tolerated on military bases means that, quote-unquote, it's gotten really bad. It's gotten pretty bad, I should say. And so I don't understand what it is that's gotten pretty bad, just allowing tolerance based on the Constitution. I don't understand that. I'd like him to answer that for me. Okay, so I think I've shown quite clearly that his video is based on one false premise after another, usually based on false deductive reasoning. And if he were able to go through this logical process of deductive reasoning, he would realize some of the errors in his judgment. For example, one of the things he does in this video is equate Nazism to paganism, because both espouse occult practices. But if we looked at a Venn diagram of pagans and Nazis, you'd see very small, if any, overlap between the two practices. In fact, modern neo-Nazis are mostly Protestant Christians. So to suggest that somehow paganism equals Nazism is really a false premise, and probably one of the biggest false premises of the video. It's based on no facts whatsoever. Just because two groups happen to espouse occultism, which is just a simple practice or a set of knowledge, doesn't mean that they're exactly the same. If he had spelled it out, his deductive reasoning would have gone like this. Nazis used occult practices and theories. Pagans use occult practices and theories. Therefore, all pagans are Nazis. And we can see right away what the problem is with this argument. And that is that there's no evidence to suggest that all pagans are Nazis. Just because one group and another group espouse the same set of practices does not equate the two groups. And I'll give you another example that shows how fallacious this argument is. Now here's a similar setup for deductive fallacy, and we can see how fallacious this argument is when we look at it from this perspective. Premise number 1, Hitler was an evil man. That's true. By most people's standards, Hitler was indeed evil. Premise number 2, Hitler was an artist. That's also true. There's several paintings done by Hitler. Now the problem comes with premise number 3. Premise number 3 cannot be completely inferred by the two previous premises. And so therefore the conclusion is false. And that would be, therefore all artists are evil. There's no real evidence to back that up, and anybody who would believe that would be considered silly, right? Now, by this example, we can see that Mr. Running Wolfe's deduction is false, and that his idea that somehow pagans all espouse Nazi-like beliefs is ridiculous. I'm hoping that this video makes him realize the error of his ways. But I also realize that this man has a very large ego from some of the emails and private messages that he sent me. So I doubt that he'll really listen to it very much.